If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hello, 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 out in podcast land. We're still reading books, and I'm going to tell you, Kristen's with me today, and we're going to jump into a book that is stunning, shocking, frightening, exciting, exhilarating. Wow, it'll blow your socks off. That's all I got to say. Now,
quite the intro. What book are we talking about?
Well, we're going to talk about lifespan, and it's why we age and why we don't have to age. It's by David Sinclair and Matthew LaPlante. Tell us a little bit about who David Sinclair is. I'll tell you, I have been in a lecture hall with this man.
You have?
Mm-hmm. So tell us who he is.
And tell us
and
what
read the
year
whole thing
it was, too. Was it 2019?
Yes, this is a 2019 book.
So David Sinclair is professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2014, and he's among the top 50 people in healthcare, and that was in 2018. He has received more than 55 awards for his research and major scientific breakthroughs, including the NIH Director's Pioneer Award. Dr. Sinclair has his work have been featured on 60 Minutes and Today and in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Fortune, and Newsweek, among other publications. Wow. So Matthew D. LaPlante is an associate professor of journalistic writing at Utah State University, where he teaches news reporting and feature writing. Former U.S. Navy intelligence specialist and Middle East war correspondent, he is the author of, what is that, Superlatives, thank you. The Biology of Extremes, and co-writer of multiple other books on the intersection of science and society.
So I think I said I was in a lecture hall with this guy one time, David Sinclair.
Okay.
And you just said he has all these awards. This is an elite scientist in the world, internationally recognized. And so the way he conducts his work is investigative lab work. He is like, you want to talk about a health geek. This guy could be a geek.
He is a true health geek,
I think
he?
Perhaps.
I think he does a lot of research on himself, too. He tries out all of these.
Which a lot of these, we've read about in other books, several investigators that are way out on the fringe do that.
Yeah.
Like they'll take the smallpox vaccine and give it to a little boy or something, and see what happens.
Yeah.
But that was like hundreds of years ago. But they do strange things. But now his partner, so what I'm saying is this fella, David Sinclair, is used to writing scientific literature and reports into the journals. And that is a very technical type of writing. This book is written for the public, and you can understand it. It's a very readable book. And so Matthew LaPlante, I believe, is why that is. And so all books have, well, the books I like to read will have a table of contents, maybe an introduction, which you should read, and they will have a bibliography, and this bibliography in this book is about a third of the book, saying that the author has read every one of these, I'm sure. But the acknowledgments, I think he should have called them the gratitudes, because David Sinclair, and he just calls himself David, talks about the partnership with this other author. He says, in writing a book requires considerable kinship among all those involved in the creative process. I'm indebted to Matthew LaPlante for his friendship, sense of humor, polymath's ability to turn hundreds of discussions and dozens of whiteboard diagrams into a coherent narrative. Matt and I are both so lucky to have worked with Kathy Dalfia, this book's masterful and voracious illustrator who bravely took on the challenge to turn our words and ideas into stunning works of art. And so there are some plates in this book that I wish they were in color, because I bet you they are color. and they may be hanging on somebody's wall, but they are beautifully done. But to have someone so intellectual and so skilled in the investigative technical writing partnered with this journalist who has an extremely interesting background, what a partnership for this book.
Absolutely. I don't think it would have worked without that partnership.
I don't think we could have followed it, and I think it would have bounced and it would have gotten too technical too fast. I think Matthew guided him and said, hey, weave in the story of your grandmother that's going to help us. And so we get a very family dynamic in this book that crosses generations. And then we also get the stories that make reading easier of this kind of topic.
So the question they ask is, what if aging is a disease and that disease is treatable?
And actually, he doesn't really ask the question. He says it is.
Well, that's what's on the back. And that's how we kind of lays things out, right? Saying that we think of aging, we think of dementia, organ failure, loss of bone density, and these are symptoms. And we try to treat these symptoms. And Sinclair comes in and says, we need to treat
the underlying cause.
Yes.
Called aging. Yeah, so some other authors chimed in on this since you said the back of the book. I was kind of fond of Dean Ornish for a while.
Right.
And he says this is the most visionary book about aging I have ever read. And then we read a book, Food Fix, by Mark Hyman. And I was wondering, I'd like Mark and David to be in the room together because I kind of think, since Mark took on all the establishment and said provocative things about big pharma, big agra, and big government, I think there's a place in this book that they could have an interesting conversation. But anyway, Mark says, Lifespan will guide you through the science and the practical strategies to make your health span equal your lifespan and make that lifespan long and vibrant.
We talked about the health span versus the lifespan and the telomere.
Yes, we did, by Elizabeth Blackburn.
Yes.
Yes, so there's lots of intersections on this book so I felt prepared to read this book. So if you've been reading along with us, you'll be ready for this book. You'll get it.
Exactly. But I'm going to kind of rely on Eleanor's background in biology and expertise because it does get in the weeds a little bit here.
We want to admit that. But coming out of the weeds, and I think Mark influenced this too, David Sinclair and his grandmother liked A.A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh. And so they start the book out with a quote from him, and they end the book with a quote. So we'll save that end quote later. But the first one is, now we are 6, but now I am 6. I'm as clever, so I think I'll be 6 now, forever and ever.
Oh, I love Pooh Bear quotes.
I know. Can you remember being 6 and feeling good? And no restrictions on you, and you don't have to worry too much about being responsible.
There was on Sesame Street or Electric Company or something. There was I'm 6 years old today. I'm 6 years old today. And I remember when I turned 6, I would not stop singing that.
Yeah, well, keep singing it. So Vera was his grandmother, and she was. I'm going to say it wrong. The type of Jew, the it'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, there are several sects of Judaism, and it's a hereditary identification because of the tribes, the Hebrew tribes. And in Germany, of course, we all know the Holocaust and World War II was devastating. So his grandmother took care and helped people avoid the catastrophes, but then she left Europe and never went back, and she went as far away as she could to Australia. So David Sinclair is an Australian and did his early studies walking in the bush and became interested in science, and then found his way into the labs of people studying aging when it wasn't popular. But he was fascinated with it, and was able to find people like George Church, who wrote the foreword to the book called The Switch that we read by James Clement. And he talks about George Church in this book, and he brings up some of the other people that we have read. And I think he refers to Jason Fong's Cancer Code. Not the code, but the content of that book. And he definitely refers to the content of The Switch, and he refers to the content of The Immune by Detmer. So these are, and Blue Zones.
Blue Zones, yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, if you've been reading along with us, this book will pull a lot of that together, and it's divided into 3 parts. He talks about the past, what we know, the present, what we are learning right now, and then the third part of his book is where we're going, which is the future. And so, as I say, he's passionate about knowing where we're going. And this is what I've said about my experience in the scientific world. We know how to do a whole lot of stuff, and we can manipulate a whole lot of things at the molecular and cellular and maybe even atomic level. Society is not there yet. So what he is trying to pull together is this intellectual community and findings and society that has cultural boundaries and political boundaries and beliefs that could be in conflict with what we know how to do. But I also know that once there is an idea, you can't stop it. There's even a children's book about what do you do with an idea. Have you all ever read that one?
Mm-mm.
Oh, get this book and give it to every kid you got. It is adorable. But, you take care of the idea, you feed it, you grow it, and you can't stop ideas. I think even one of those enlightened guys, maybe like John Locke, was talking about the most powerful thing in the world is an idea. And I used to poo-poo that when I was a student. I thought, nah. But the older I've gotten, I do believe ideas are the most powerful thing. So this guy is putting forward an idea that totally rocks our world, particularly the medical world, which is built on interventional medicine, and it's funded for specific disease remedies, and it is not funded for what he calls the underlying cause, which is aging.
So what is his idea? That we can cure aging, that we can stop it?
He says there is no evidence that you have to die or that you have to age.
Yeah, he throws around the word immortal a couple
Yes,
times,
he does.
right?
He
So
does.
that's what's creepy about it a little bit.
Well, and that's because this is a new idea to a lot of us, and a lot of times we will resist new ideas.
It's
and
just hard to wrap our
Yeah.
brain around it in our normal context that we
Yeah,
have.
and going through a day, you don't normally think about this stuff, but we probably should be thinking about it. Let me just read something from the introduction. He says, there is no biological law that says we must age. And he has a footnote on that. So he's not the only one that thinks that. Then he says, we're at another point in historical inflection. What heretofore seemed magical will become real. It is a time in which humanity will redefine what is possible, a time of ending the inevitable. Indeed, it is a time in which we will redefine what it means to be human, for this is not just the start of a revolution, it is the start of an evolution. So what does it mean to be human? He goes and starts off with viva primordium, which is meaning to live the beginning. Hey, how did it all come? So he goes through the whole starburst thing, like the nosedive did.
Another book that starts with this.
The nosedive, the stardust and the Big Bang, and then how slow it all comes to have a planet formed, and then other orbital things that are out in the universe, and how many of them there are. Volcanoes, volcanic rock. I went to the Galapagos and I saw some of this volcanic rock, and I saw the beginning of what we call succession. In ecology, there are communities that begin to inhabit these inhabitable places, and then they make it a little more attractive for another group of organisms to arrive. And then all of a sudden you got a community, and then you have an ecosystem. It's a slow process. For humans to appear in that timeline, it's long time. So he goes over all that. So if you like reading that kind of stuff, you can read through that. He says it's come as no surprise that there's never been a unified theory of aging. So he goes over the hypotheses of what does it mean to age. Mm-hmm. And those, I think, are DNA damage. You can have a loss of genetic information that comes from maybe radiation or just mutations that occur in the division of the cell. The second theory would be the error catastrophic hypothesis. The third one is the free radical theory of aging, which she says is the one that most people are accepting right now, that we have a lot of free radicals bombing around inside our cells, and they're knocking on proteins and breaking them apart and breaking the DNA. And so we need to take a whole bunch of antioxidants, and it's going to fix the whole thing. And he says, but there's no evidence that those antioxidants are really fixing anything. So he didn't want to accept that theory. So he comes up with his own theory of aging, and it's called the information theory of aging. You want to say anything about that one, Kristen?
Do I have notes on that? Which says that aging occurs because of a loss of cellular information, and that loss of information happens when the DNA is not repaired properly. So maybe I have this written down, and I'm going to, again, rely on Eleanor to correct me because I did my best to try to absorb and understand all this. But he was going into this gene circuit that we have gene A as a quote-unquote caretaker gene that shuts down when environmental stress is detected. And then there's gene B who can quiet the caretaker and say, okay, everything is good. We're going to restart reproduction mode. But first, it's going to repair any damaged DNA. Am I correct so far?
He's calling that the survival mechanism, right?
Survival. And so am I correct in thinking that his theory is that the repair process just doesn't happen correctly, and then that's where we lose the information, and then the cells don't even know what kind of cell to be in the end?
Yeah, when we read the cancer code, we talked about de-differentiation. This author calls it X-differentiation, where the cell reverts to a progenitor type of cell. And what Fong was saying is it's for survival. This cell decides it's going to be an independent cell, an independent organism in cancer, and will no longer cooperate and be part of a community, and just is out for itself. And that, so it divides and takes over, and
just goes
complicates.
rogue.
Yeah, it complicates the whole thing. But he says it's reverting in an evolutionary backward way, and I think this guy says the same thing. But what I got out of the information theory of aging was, he said there's two parts to it. There's a digital communication, which is part of what you were talking about in that gene A to gene B. And digitals are like on or off, 0 or 1. That's where computers work. They're based on a binary code. There are quaternary, hexanary. There are all sorts of different number systems. And our DNA has got A, C, T, and G. It's a quaternary code. So he's saying there's a digital code, but the epigenetic or the on top of that is an analog system. So you have a digital system and an analog system. Analog systems are more of a like a pulsing, and they have amplitude, so they can be small or big, and that digital is either on or off. These can be a little bit or a lot of this pulse. And so based on the situation the cell finds itself in, gene A or gene B is going to be working on either the digital or the override analog. So this is pretty complicated for me. And I'm sure you listening out there went, yeah, we know my head. So
I was getting ready to ask, what the hell did you just say?
Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is this Sinclair guy is thinking radically.
Right.
He is saying, I'm not accepting the current theories on aging. I've got a better idea, and I got a whole lot of people in my lab, and there are a whole lot of people in a whole lot of other labs that are kind of showing we might be on the right path. And so listen up, public, because we have ideas to change your life. And you're either going to accept them or reject them. And he says, I don't care if you do or not. I mean, he's very, I don't know if I like this guy or love this guy. I am stuck, and I'm like conflicted with what do I think about David Sinclair?
I feel that 100%. He comes across a little bit arrogant, but I guess if you've done a lot of that research and you've got all those awards, maybe you deserve to be pretty proud of yourself.
Kind of earned it.
Right. They have a podcast, a short little podcast series.
Yeah.
And you can listen to them interact with each other and kind of debrief you on these concepts. So
Yeah, he talks to Joe Rogan too.
does he?
Yeah. So that may be a little more public oriented. I don't know. The other cool thing that Sinclair did was he discovered these genes called sirtuins. And the sirtuin genes are the anti-aging genes, and they make proteins that regulate, they're like epigenetic regulators of the DNA. So the SR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Let me share my notes.
Yes.
So a sirtuin?
Mm-hmm. Sirtuin.
Sirtuin is also like this caretaker gene. Goes around turning genes on or off in response to illness or inflammation. And so this is a fight against aging. But then he says, if those are poor caretakers not functioning correctly, they too can go rogue and contribute to the loss of cellular information. And that's the cause of aging.
Yeah, so understanding how they work is important. And they make proteins. These genes make proteins. And some of these proteins are the ones called histones that are involved in our DNA. And DNA is a long molecule, and it's just this ACGT code, but it winds up, and these proteins help wind it up like a garden hose. He says you wind your garden hose up, and then you can take better care of it. So these histones get acted upon by these sirtuin genes, these epigenetic things. But there are other regulators besides these genes. There's something called mTOR, and we ran into mTOR in the switch. mTOR is the target of rapamycin. It's on the surface of most of our cells, and it can be inhibited or not inhibited, and it determines whether the cell will be in a building mode or a cleanup mode. We call that autophagy when it's in the cleanup mode. And we are learning more and more about autophagy and how our body has a surveillance system to say, these cells are dying, or they're senescent, or this one's broken, let's get rid of it, and here comes the immune system. So we read Immune by Detmore, and that gives you a really good insight into how that immune response is going on, because this author doesn't go into that too much. He just talks about mTOR, and it talks about AMPK, which is another metabolic control enzyme, and he talks about NAD. And we will talk more about NAD as we go on with this conversation, probably. But you asked me about the biology and the tedium of this beginning of the book. Did I go too far?
No, I think that's good. I think that will kind of set us up for further conversations, because, this is a book we can dive into. We'll probably do a couple podcasts on it.
Yeah, I would love to, because I think this is a book you guys want to know about, probably read. And we're going to give you some more insight into the exciting ideas that he puts forward.
For now, just revel on the idea that we could be immortal.
Yeah, and so if you're wanting to see your great-great-grandkids, but feel good when you see them, not to have this agony, to age well with vitality, stay tuned. We'll talk some more.
Yeah, and I'm Kristen Norton, one of the 3 registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition. We invite you to go to our website, wellbalancednutrition.com. Take a look around at our blogs, our free monthly workshops, and sign up for a free clarity call to see if nutrition and wellness coaching is right for you.
And I'm Eleanor at 360health4u.com. And interestingly enough, I help people who want to extend their health span so that it's a maximized lifespan, and would like to have that conversation with you if you're interested in it. Eleanor Russell at 360health4u.com.
Until next time.
The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.